Heaven is a place for sociopaths. Let me cook. What kind of people would celebrate after a bloodbath? Who would throw a party and worship the one who was responsible for the bloodbath? This isn't the setup for a horror movie. This is literally Christianity at its peak, what it looks like when it wins according to its own literature. When Christianity wins, believers often see that victory not as the triumph of love, but as a day of bloody vengeance coupled with eternal celebration. So here's the question. Why would a loving person want to spend eternity celebrating while knowing that others are being perpetually tortured? And why would anyone call that heaven or them good? For many believers, the longing for heaven isn't rooted in love, growth, or purpose. It's rooted in avoidance. It's not about becoming something greater, but escaping something unbearable. Heaven promises to remove pain, not to transform it, to silence questions, not to answer them. It becomes less about connection with the divine and more about relief from human experience, a divine anesthesia that numbs the ache of existence. No more pain, no more tears. It sounds comforting, but it also implies no more depth, no more friction, no more evolution. It's not a place to live forever, it's a place to hide forever. Faith traditions often sell heaven as a final answer, the end of questioning. Certainty becomes the idol. But if curiosity, doubt, and growth are what makes consciousness meaningful, then heaven's static perfection sounds more like psychological death than any type of spiritual fulfillment. It's the end of all becoming, a place where you are frozen in one emotional state forever. The promise of heaven also lets believers outsource moral accountability. You don't have to fix the world, you just survive it faithfully. You don't have to make peace with your enemies. God will handle that later. Heaven, in this framing, becomes a cosmic deferment of justice. It absolves the believer of participating in the messy, difficult work of compassion right here on earth. The image of heaven as endless worship, singing, bowing, praising, it may sound holy, but it's psychologically revealing. It's the ultimate compliance fantasy. Perfect submission without fatigue, joy without individuality, obedience without question. It's not love, it's submission under divine surveillance. It's God's own version of how to train your bottoms. So when we strip away the poetry and promises, what's left isn't love for a God, it's fear of the alternative. It's the desperation of someone clinging to the only story that promises safety. And that, my friends, is not devotion, that's dependency. A spiritual codependence where God is the abuser, heaven is the reconciliation fantasy, and hell is the threat that keeps you from leaving. When I say heaven is a place for sociopaths, I'm not just saying it for shock value. I know it sounds like an insult, but it's not meant to mock believers. It's meant to interrogate the moral logic of what's being celebrated. Because if we strip away the emotional comfort and look at it rationally, the core idea of heaven, eternal joy existing alongside eternal suffering, is a contradiction that only works if you suspend empathy. It forces a question few dare to ask. How could a moral being experience eternal bliss knowing that others are in endless agony? The moment you ask that question, the facade of moral coherence starts to crumble. Eternal joy in the Christian framework is presented as a reward, but a reward for what? For obedience? For loyalty? For believing the right things while others did not. It's joy that requires someone else's exclusion, a happiness made possible because someone else didn't make it. That's not universal love, that's tribal triumph. And that's where the sociopathic parallel comes in. To enjoy heaven, you must learn to feel nothing for the condemned. To find peace, you must silence compassion. That's moral detachment disguised as righteousness. In this model, empathy isn't rewarded, it's punished. Because empathy would ruin the experience. If heaven is truly perfect, then you can't be troubled by the screams of the damned. You can't grieve the friends or family who didn't make it. You can't mourn the injustice of eternal suffering. You must call it divine order. That means heaven's peace depends on one's ability to emotionally disassociate from suffering, an ability psychologists call moral disengagement. In essence, the gates of heaven don't just filter out sinners, they filter out our feelings as well. If you designed a society where its citizens could only be happy by ignoring pain, that society would not be moral. It would be pathological. That's what sociopathy is, the severing of empathy from identity. In psychological terms, it's the capacity to rationalize harm or injustice in service to a higher ideal, to say it's okay because it's God's will. That's what makes the premise so provocative. If heaven is populated by people who can witness eternal suffering and still call it good, then the only people who could truly enjoy heaven are those who've learned to stop feeling. This isn't just a critique of theology, it's a mirror to the believer, because every time someone says they'll get what's coming to them or God's justice will take care of that, they're rehearsing the psychology of heaven. They're learning how to detach, how to feel peace in the face of pain, and how to justify cruelty as divine. Heaven, in that sense, becomes the final test of empathy, and most of its imagined residents fail it beautifully. If eternal joy requires blindness to eternal suffering, then heaven isn't a reward for goodness. It's the apex of moral anesthesia. It's a world where empathy is incompatible with peace. And if that's true, then maybe heaven isn't a place for the loving at all. Maybe it's the last refuge of those who have learned to mistake indifference for faith. Now, clinically, a sociopath is diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. This is a condition defined not just by the absence of empathy, but by the presence of calculated detachment. Sociopaths tend to lack genuine remorse for the suffering of others. They dismiss moral norms when those norms interfere with their identity, their tribe, or personal ambition, or they justify harm or injustice through clever rationalization, not because they can't tell right from wrong, but because they stop caring when it costs them something. They don't always kill or steal. Sometimes they just smile and stay silent while others do. In simple terms, a sociopath can witness cruelty and call it justice. They can look upon suffering and convince themselves it's deserved. They can see someone burning and feel nothing, or worse, satisfaction, because they've outsourced their morality to an authority figure. That's the unsettling resonance here. Christianity, as often preached, trains its followers in the art of moral detachment under divine supervision. It's not my place to question God. They had their chance. Justice is his, not mine. Each phrase is a little anesthetic, numbing the natural impulse to empathize, to ache, or to intervene. Sound familiar? Heaven, in this light, becomes less of a moral utopia and more of a psychological experiment in selective compassion. To belong, you must silence empathy for the damned. To experience peace, you must accept suffering as holy. It's an environment that rewards loyalty to power and punishes emotional honesty. If you feel disturbed by eternal torment, you're questioning God. If you don't feel disturbed, you're faithful. Heaven, then, doesn't just test belief, it measures how effectively you can detach from moral reality while calling it righteousness. To truly enjoy heaven, you must accept that billions suffer eternally and still call that arrangement just. That's moral disengagement, the psychological process of separating your sense of goodness from the outcomes of your beliefs. I'm happy forever, even though others are being tortured, because God says it's okay. That isn't love. It's moral anesthesia, a numbing of consequence masquerading as peace. It's the same mechanism that allows soldiers to dehumanize enemies or cult members to justify harm in the name of purity. Heaven, as described, just scales it to eternity. Compassion, then, in this theology, isn't universal. It's tribal. You care for the saved, not the suffering. You celebrate being chosen rather than questioning why anyone must be excluded. It's the emotional logic of nationalism. We are good because they are not. We are safe because they are gone. Heaven becomes the ultimate gated community, not built on love, but literally built on boundaries, not on reconciliation, but on reward, not on equality, but on divine favoritism. This is nationalism with a halo. In this system, righteousness is redefined. The righteous are not those who seek justice for others. They're those who can ignore injustice without losing faith. They've mastered the emotional art of detachment. They say things like they've made their choice or God knows best, and each phrase is used to reinforce spiritual indifference as virtue. Each lyric sung in heaven becomes a lullaby that drowns out the screams below. If that's paradise, then heaven isn't a home for the loving. It's a sanctuary for the sociopathic, a place where moral numbness is mistaken for divine peace. Imagine it this way so we can make it plain. A man slaughters his enemies, not metaphorically, but literally, and then throws a massive celebration. The guests arrive dressed in white, singing songs about his greatness, drinking wine, and praising his power. They call it justice. They call it victory. Now, outside of religion, we'd call that a horror story. We'd call that mass murder. We'd call the guests complicit, traumatized, or morally broken. But inside Christian eschatology, that scene is presented as heaven's grand opening. Welcome in. In the final act of Christian prophecy, particularly in Revelation, the central figure, the Lamb, drenches the world in blood to establish divine rule. The symbolism is clear. Salvation through slaughter, peace through domination, love through fear. And the saved, they don't mourn the dead, they sing. They worship the executioner as their savior. It's not a moral awakening, it's a mass psychosis of praise, a celebration of power drenched in the blood of humanity. Heaven becomes the eternal afterparty where the victors dance on the graves of the condemned. And the unsettling question remains, what kind of person would actually want to be there? Psychologists studying war or genocide often talk about moral inversion, the process by which cruelty is reinterpreted as compassion and vengeance as virtue. It's how soldiers justify killing or zealots justify persecution. The same mechanism operates in apocalyptic Christianity. Believers are taught that divine violence isn't evil, it's love in its purest form. This language should sound frighteningly familiar. That blood isn't horror for them, it's holiness. That suffering isn't tragedy, it's triumph. In that light, heaven becomes not the end of evil, but its rebranding. When you praise the one who caused the suffering, you participate in the act, even if passively. Worship becomes the moral laundering of violence. Every song of gratitude becomes a way of saying, I'm glad it wasn't me. I'm glad I'm on the winning side. That's Stockholm Syndrome with the choir. It's the psychology of subjugation, not salvation. The emotional choreography of those who've learned to call their captor king. If heaven's joy is built on the foundation of someone else's eternal suffering, then heaven doesn't abolish evil. It institutionalizes it. It takes the moral horror of endless torment and baptizes it as justice. That's the deepest irony. Christianity claims to end sin by building eternity on its same logic: domination, exclusion, obedience, and fear. It replaces human cruelty with divine cruelty and calls the exchange redemption. At the heart of Christianity lies a striking paradox. The story begins with forgiveness, but ends with vengeance. It starts with a man who says, "Love your enemies," and concludes with a God who burns them. That shift from compassion to conquest reveals something profound about the psychology of belief. When victory is defined not by reconciliation, but by revenge, the gospel ceases to be the good news. It becomes cosmic score settling, God as the ultimate enforcer for the wounded ego of the believer. Many believers are taught to imagine heaven as the moment of distinction, when the wheat is separated from the weeds, the sheep from the goats, the saints from the sinners. But notice the emotional undercurrent. Joy is derived not simply from being saved, but from being separate. It turns spirituality into a spectator sport, where eternal suffering becomes a scoreboard that proves your team won, and segregation becomes the prize. Heaven and hell together form the architecture of tribal morality. One tribe is chosen, the other condemned. And because the authority is divine, the division feels righteous. We are the children of light. They are of the darkness. This is the oldest justification for human cruelty, turning difference into damnation and calling it destiny. It's moral regression cloaked in celestial language. A faith that celebrates eternal punishment inevitably reproduces that cruelty on earth. It breeds believers who conflate compassion with weakness and mistake domination for divine order. From crusades to culture wars, the story repeats. God's side must win. And in every victory, the loser's suffering is interpreted as proof of righteousness. But vengeance, divine or otherwise, doesn't heal the world. It merely mirrors the violence it claims to end. If the highest hope of the faithful is the eternal defeat of others, then heaven isn't love fulfilled, it's hate rewarded, because real love doesn't rejoice when others are condemned. It grieves, it questions, it reaches, it refuses to rest while anyone remains outside. So maybe the most unsettling truth is this: if heaven requires vengeance to feel complete, then the truly moral soul, the one still capable of empathy, would rather stay outside the gates. If heaven is a place of perfect peace and hell is a place of endless agony, then anyone who truly loves must face this paradox. How can you be eternally happy while knowing that others, perhaps even people you loved, are being eternally tortured? That's the empathy dilemma, the moral fracture that sits at the heart of salvation theology. For a truly compassionate mind, this idea is unbearable. So the believer must do something unnatural. They must learn not to feel. To survive that contradiction, believers are conditioned into one of three mental responses, each one a way to numb the empathy. Number one, ignore it. This is willful blindness. They stop thinking about hell altogether. They compartmentalize it, focusing only on the comfort of the saved. Hell becomes a topic for sermons, not for sorrow. It's not that they don't care, it's that caring hurts too much. So they suppress the thought like trauma. Heaven for them depends on strategic amnesia. Or they might justify it. This is moral corruption. At this point, they defend it passionately. They reframe eternal torture as justice, as though infinite punishment could ever be proportionate to finite disbelief. This is where empathy mutates into ideology. They call cruelty holy and reinterpret compassion as rebellion against order. It's easier to call suffering righteous than to admit your heaven depends on it. Or even worse, they enjoy it. This is sanctified sadism, and I've seen it more than I'd like to admit. These are those who take it further. They rejoice in the idea of divine punishment. They look forward to the day when believers, sinners, or skeptics get what's coming. They write songs about it. They sing praises about it. Their laughter becomes liturgy. Their vengeance becomes worship. And in that celebration of suffering, religion reaches its most grotesque form, a faith that confuses cruelty for comfort. Psychologically, this is what happens in abusive systems. The oppressed are told their suffering has meaning, and the loyal are told their silence is virtue. Heaven replicates that same pattern. It turns emotional dissonance into faith. If you feel disturbed by divine cruelty, you're told your empathy is rebellion. If you feel nothing, you're told your faith is strong. Over time, the believer learns the emotional reflex of authoritarian religion, to distrust their own compassion and revere their numbness. In such a world, empathy itself becomes dangerous. To feel deeply is to question God's justice. To question God's justice is to risk damnation. And so the very quality that makes us human, our ability to suffer with others, is systematically trained out of us in the name of holiness. That's the cruelest trick of all. A religion that preaches love but punishes empathy, ensuring that only the emotionally desensitized can fully belong. So the peace of heaven comes at a cost, not to the sinner, but to the saint. Because to live without empathy is to live without humanity. And if you got to abandon your humanity to enter heaven, then what you're entering isn't paradise, it's post-human compliance. So let's ask it plainly. Would a truly good person even want to go to heaven? Because if heaven is a place where empathy disqualifies you, if compassion ruins the mood, and if conscience gets in the way of your joy, then heaven isn't a reward for goodness. It's a retirement plan for moral detachment. And that's not a paradise I'd want to participate in. It's a pathology I want to avoid at all cost. Heaven, as preached, only works if someone else suffers eternally. It's a binary system, joy and torment, grace and wrath, insider and outsider. But if your happiness depends on another's agony, your heaven is just another hell. You've simply changed seats. That's the hidden transaction at the heart of salvation theology. Peace purchased with pain, purity achieved through exclusion, and love that only lasts as long as someone else is denied it. This is moral economics at its ugliest. The truth is, a good person, a truly loving, empathetic person, couldn't survive in that heaven. They'd protest it, they'd grieve it, they'd refuse to sing until everyone was free. They'd rather stand outside the gates in solidarity with the condemned than to bow to a God who calls endless suffering holy, because love doesn't stop at the gates. So maybe the real question isn't how do we get into heaven? Maybe it's how do we heal humanity of the kind of thinking that made us invent heaven in the first place? Because this isn't really about an afterlife. It's about what we justify in this one. For centuries, people have been taught to believe that separation is sacred, that exclusion is divine, and that the suffering of others can somehow make us whole. But humanity doesn't need more promises of paradise. It needs healing from the ideologies that keep turning compassion into competition and difference into damnation. If there's anything worth saving, it isn't our ticket to heaven. It's our capacity to care about each other without needing heaven to reward it. So no, the question isn't how do we get in? It's how do we finally grow out of needing to? When I think about what community is, when I think about what the church was for many people, I think about community as a service. I know so many people right now whose passion was media, and if it weren't for their church, they wouldn't be able to pursue that passion. I know so many people whose passion is music, and if it weren't for their church, they wouldn't have a place to practice that passion. I know people whose passion is communication and finding ways to inspire and motivate other people, and if it weren't for their churches, church shouldn't be the only place that meets those needs. It shouldn't be the only place that nurtures our gifts, platforms our voices, and empowers our living. That's why Bridge City Global is building community and creating the space to help you keep rising. Join us October 25th or the 26th in Venice or San Diego, your choice. Our local Bridge City community is having their initial liftoff weekend. And as a way of celebrating, we're hosting our very first Rise event. This is for you. We're about to shed the weight of limiting beliefs and open ourselves to clarity, purpose, and possibility. Through powerful voices and intentional community, you'll not only rediscover your own strength, but also the belonging that comes when we choose to rise side by side. And for those interested in being a part of this global community, go ahead and tap in now. And you may get an invite to our Friday evening and Sunday morning activities while you're in Cali. Don't miss this moment. Add Liftoff Weekend to your calendar and be ready to rise. Register now.
Take another shot at me.
October is here, which means the clock is counting down to California. You still have time to register and make arrangements to meet me and the team, either in Los Angeles or San Diego. Rise isn't just another event. It's the inauguration of a movement, a cinematic community experience where curiosity meets clarity, ideas meet insight, and people meet purpose. If you've been feeling the shift in culture, in community, in yourself, this is where it comes to life. Do not miss this moment. Rise is where the thinkers, the dreamers, and the builders are meeting. It's where we turn humanist values into human progress. And it's where we stop waiting for change and become it. You've heard us talk about it. You've seen the spark. Now it's time for you to be in the room. So join us for Rise. Register today. Let's show the world what happens when people unite beyond belief. And for those of you who are excited about this movement, make sure you drop $1 in the collection plate so we can keep the lights on for those who are looking for us. All the relevant links are in the description. Thank you for hanging out with me today. Until next time, keep rising.